Hello ladies and gentle weebs, I'm back out of hibernation because I've been playing a little game known as Honkai Star Rail, as I'm sure 99% of you actually been playing from the Genshin Impact community, well at least tried it. So I'm going to do a little bit of a review. I'm just going to do it off the cuff and see how this goes. So I'm probably going to be comparing this game to Genshin Impact like constantly, even though they're kind of completely different genres. There's a lot of similarities between these two games, so if you don't think they can be compared, then I don't really know what to tell you, to be honest. So let's start off by talking about general gameplay. So this game is a turn-based RPG, very reminiscent of JRPGs, which have kind of existed since the dawn of time. A lot of the kind of systems and the way it kind of all plays out has already been worked out in other games, so they've kind of just taken that model and then put it into this game. So most maps are quite simplistic, they're quite linear, you kind of have a few offshoot like directions which usually lead to a chest, and there's usually like a strong mob in the way, but for the most part it's quite linear, which is actually kind of good for this type of game. I'm kind of glad it isn't like Genshin Impact where you got these big open sprawling maps, because when you've got enemies that you have to go into like a turn-based combat with, if you have them in a big open area, you'll just walk past them most of the time. Whereas this, they kind of put them in strategically in places where you kind of have to actually fight them. They act as an actual wall between you and where you want to go. You can try and avoid them, but it kind of has this whole kind of encounter system outside of combat, which again is quite common in a lot of JRPG games, at least like modern ones. That kind of level design really works well with general gameplay. So before I actually talk about the combat, the other thing I do want to mention is, actually, funnily enough, this is an idea I've had for JRPGs for a while, where you can actually switch between your characters and they each have unique skills out of combat. The depth of it's quite limited. It's kind of like, well, we do a buff or we hit them with a special attack, so then when we go into the encounter we get like a bonus. The only one that's kind of a bit different is Seele, where she actually can kind of go invisible. So I think in the future there's going to be more interesting mechanics with this whole technique thing that they've got going on. But I like the idea anyway. The other thing to mention is before you enter combat, each enemy kind of has these weaknesses that you kind of see along the top, so you kind of have to switch to the right character to attack them. So it all just adds a little bit extra to encountering an enemy. Sometimes you might be caught off guard and you kind of have to quickly hit them, which then results in you not getting the weakness because you didn't switch to the right character. Sometimes it's like, if you're stupid like me, the enemy will actually catch you and get you into an ambush where they get like a benefit against you at the start of the fight. So all that kind of stuff, it's kind of common in a lot of JRPGs, but the way they've done it is a bit different, so I quite like that. Now the combat itself, when this game first got announced and I saw the combat, I was very skeptical, because the problem is when you've only got like 3 skills per character and one of those skills is just a basic attack, you are very limited on the depth of the combat. A lot of JRPGs have a lot of different skills that you can use for a lot of different situations, which all work around enemy mechanics. So the way this works is you'll have a character that has the ability to dispel something, or to buff something, or to cause a damage over time effect or whatever. They've also got like follow-up attacks and all this kind of stuff. So these are kind of, instead of having like a group of 3 characters and you've got all these at your disposal, they're kind of very limited. Like, you can't have all these mechanics on you at once. So what that ends up doing is, instead of having it to be moment-to-moment gameplay in the combat and you working out how to beat the boss, it ends up, oh, I've got to build a team to suit this situation, which is very much like how Genshin Impact works, where a lot of the time you don't really do a lot in combat. All you're doing is you build a team around like an idea, and then all you do then is you kind of do a rotation in the combat. It's kind of like by the numbers. You don't really react too much. You do sometimes with some of the boss fights, but a lot of the time you just do stuff and stuff dies because you've done all the prep work beforehand. And that was kind of one of my concerns going into this game. That is how the game works. The one saving grace with the combat for me is that it feels really good, and some of the boss fights have mechanics and stuff that kind of alleviate some of this kind of by the numbers kind of gameplay. I found, at least through the story, you can brute force a lot of it, but that's kind of expected with the story. But the reason why the combat feels so nice is because of how quick and snappy it is, especially when you're playing on 2x speed. So you can sort of set it to 2x speed and just go for it. The attacks come out really quickly because of the way you kind of input the commands. You're not going through menus, you're just pressing buttons. Because there's a very limited number of actual skills per character, it becomes very action-like rather than, okay, we got to go, oh, I'm going to like decide what I'm going to do now, and then it's less forward planning and more kind of you just go. And I do quite like that. There is some strategy here and there. Sometimes you need to look at your turn order and go, okay, well, I'm going to get hit next time. I need to prepare for that or whatever. But for the most part, especially like, for example, I use Natasha. It's like, oh, the enemy's going to do an AoE now. So he'll hit me and I'll just save her ult for then. I think the ult system is quite good as well because the fact you can actually do them out of turn. So that adds another kind of layer of depth. But as far as like these kind of JRPG type of games that you get on mobile, it's kind of, that's just kind of how they go. Because of the gacha system, everything has to have an element and like a counter. Like the closest JRPG I can kind of compare this game to is probably Persona 5. The way the combat kind of goes and the way the weakness stuff all works. As of right now, I'm enjoying the combat, but I'm concerned that later down the line, I might just get bored because there's not enough there. But it really depends what they do with boss fights and any like other mechanics outside of the actual characters. Because I think for me that will make or break the combat in the future. So I can't really judge the combat completely because I think I'm only on about World 5 on the simulated universe. So I haven't really gotten to like the hardest content that's currently in the game. In the Forgotten Hall, I'm not that far in. I think I've only got up to level 5 because I've literally just finished the story yesterday, like before recording this. I still have to kind of get to this kind of end game, so to speak, and see like how the combat plays out there. The other thing is the characters I managed to get through the gacha. I was incredibly lucky. We'll talk about that in a bit, but some of that probably really trivialized the game for me because the character I got is kind of busted. But yeah, speaking of endgame, the one thing I really dislike with Genshin Impact is the Abyss. And the reason I dislike it is because it's just DPS checks and timers. And it mostly just boils down the damage you're doing and not actually interacting with the actual mechanics. Occasionally you do have to interact with mechanics, right? I'm not saying that you don't. Some of the bosses require you to do certain things. I just generally don't find the mechanics in Genshin Impact bosses that fun and engaging, but that's just my personal opinion. As I said, it just boils down to dishing out damage and not actually interacting with these mechanics too much. So I'm quite happy that Star Rail decided to go with an Elysium Realm approach, which is kind of like a roguelike type of game where you go through a level, you fight enemies, you get blessings, you get curios and all these things and all these different buffs. And then by the end, depending on how lucky you are and what choices you made, you can beat the boss or you can't beat the boss at the end. I really like that type of gameplay. It's basically the Elysium Realm from Honkai Impact, just a bit different, but I really like that type of gameplay. And this is kind of something that I wanted them to put in Genshin Impact for a long time, because the whole idea, the whole kind of concept around Genshin Impact is exploration. So the one thing that I thought when I first started playing Genshin Impact, the one thing I thought they were going to do were make dungeons that you could explore and maybe have some procedural generation stuff, which would be just brilliant for endgame. But they never did it. Instead, they went with this like, and it's the same with the domains. You kind of just go into a room, you fight stuff, and then you get the reward, which I think sucks. Whereas with this, they've gone, okay, we're going to actually make kind of a dungeon, even though it's incredibly linear. I would have liked it if there was a bit more to it. And it's, again, it's just using maps that exist in the game already rather than something unique. But that's all fine. The actual functionality of the thing is decent. And the other thing I forgot to mention is the simulated universe actually kind of combines part of the relic farming with the simulated universe. So instead of like in Genshin where we just go into a room and we fight things and then we get a reward, in this you actually have to go through the simulated universe, fight a boss, and then you have the option then to open the reward like chest thing at the end. Or you can go right to the boss at the very end and then you can like claim it as many times as you want. Even though it might take a little bit longer, it's a bit more engaging from like a player's standpoint. And the other thing is you can actually, it's got kind of like a condensed resin system, but you can like save up to 8 of them. So you could not play the game for a few days like properly and just stock these up so you've got 8 and then just play Simulated Universe one day, get to the end and just spend all of them. The time kind of consumption that you would have doing domains over and over, which is this repetitive stuff, instead of just doing that a little bit each day, you can kind of go into Simulated Universe one evening and just kind of blast it out and like actually play the game and enjoy the game and then spend all your stuff that you saved up. So I quite like the way that's designed. But the other thing is the Simulated Universe isn't the only thing that replaces the Abyss in this game. The other thing we have is the Forgotten Hall. This is kind of the game mode that has the DPS check because it has like a turn limit on how many you have to do to beat the boss. I don't know what it's going to be like Endgame. I know there's like I forgot what it's called. It's like the Chaos something of Chaos, which is kind of like your Spiral Abyss equivalent. I think I'm only on like floor 5 or whatever, so I'm nowhere near that at the moment. But it has that kind of, you got to beat these enemies in this time limit and then you get a reward based on that. But instead it's a turn limit. I prefer that just because it works better with a turn-based game. Obviously, you wouldn't have a time limit for that. But it's not just a turn limit. There's also, like, to get the other 2 stars, there's usually other conditions that you have to meet. So it's not just all about a DPS check. So at the moment, I'm fine with it. I don't really like DPS check bullshit, but I think it's okay. I'll reserve my judgment until I've actually gotten to the end and I've seen how ridiculous this stuff is and how catered it is to certain character types, because that was kind of the problem with Genshin Impact. The Abyss is like, oh, this time we've released a character, so we're going to make the additional buffs and stuff all around that character that's just released, so then you feel like you need to buy that character. I remember when they did that with Kokomi, they added a whole new mechanic just because they wanted people to get Kokomi, and nobody did it. Yeah, so for the most part, I'm happy with Endgame. It's good that we've got a couple of different things to do rather than just having the Abyss. And the way they're designed, I feel like they're better just because of the whole turn-based style gameplay. I just think I'm happier with the end game so far. Whether or not that'll wear off later on down the line, well, I guess we'll see. The game's only been out for a few weeks, so let's talk about visuals and graphics. First of all, I'm very, very happy with the way this game looks. Specifically the characters. The characters look really, really nice. When it comes to like anime style characters, I'm quite invested in that because I actually do a bit of 3D modeling around anime characters. And the one thing that I've noticed, which probably not a lot of people have, is if you look at the characters' faces, the way the light falls on the faces is very particular. Specifically, if you look underneath the one side of the eye where the light is the opposite side of, you get a triangle, which is called Rembrandt's triangle. And this requires a very specific setup for the typology of the model's face and the normals. So they've taken the time to make that look really good. So it gets to a point that no matter where the light is, except for one point, which is when the light's behind them, the face is lit up in a very specific way that is reminiscent of anime. At times you'll find that on the side of the nose there is like a small triangle of light, depending on how like steep the angle is, or there's sometimes a shadow depending. So there's all these kind of setups for the shading that they've done a really good job with. I'm very impressed compared to Genshin Impact, which does a similar thing, but it doesn't do it at the same level. As for character designs, I think for the most part they're really good. But there's kind of a bit of a spectrum there. So on one hand, you've kind of got Himiko, who looks really good. She looks like she's got like a fashion designer. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you got a character like Natasha, who looks like she just woke up out of bed in the morning and just found whatever clothes she had on the floor and put them on, even though they just don't match. Like, her design is so mismatched and kind of all over the place. It's kind of like, is it a good design or isn't it a good design? It's kind of hard to say, because maybe the fact that she looks mismatched is intentional because she's from down in the underworld. I don't know. There's other things that kind of bug me, like Clara. Why the hell is she not wearing any shoes? Like anything on her feet. She's just got her feet on the cold, snow-covered ground all the time. So like, she shouldn't have toes, and her feet should be black and dead from frostbite, basically. You got girl boss Bronya. She looks good. You got Kid Bronya, she looks good. And then you got Mommy Bronya, you know, they all look really cool. But then you've got like certain characters, like this character. She basically looks like she's just gambled all her aesthetics away. Like she looks so plain and boring. But I get it. Not every character can look great. And you could say, well, she's just a 4-star. But then you've got characters like Saval and Ting Yun who look really good and they've got a lot of detail. So I don't really see any coloration there between 4-star and 5-star. I think like it doesn't really matter for the most part. It's just some characters look good, other characters don't. All subjective, whatever. Let's move on. So for the general environments, I think the environments generally look pretty good. Valabog, the city, looks really great. And the general aesthetic really for the game is kind of like this 18th century kind of science fiction like world that you don't often get. So from that perspective, it's very unique. Maybe there are other games out there. I guess like Honkai Impact didn't really have that style, but I know they had an event which was based on like a Arthur Conan Doyle kind of novel, which kind of had that aesthetic in it. So it's cool to see like an entire game kind of use that. I'm interested to see what the other locations look like in the future. But yeah, I think it looks really cool. The one thing I have noticed with the environments though is sometimes some of the objects in the environment are like really, really low quality. The one example I can think of off the top of my head is when you're in the Express, there is a table somewhere, there is like a teacup on there. And the teacup looks like a hexagon, like it's so low poly. And well, you could just say, well, it's not an important thing in the world and it's a mobile game, so they kind of have to keep the poly count down so it runs better on mobiles and doesn't take up as much space and all these kinds of things. But the thing that annoys me about it is at one point when you're having a conversation with Himiko, whatever name, it actually does a zoom in to that table and shows the stuff on the table. And you can see the cup there, and you're just like, why are you showing me the worst modeled thing in the room at the moment? Have they heard of LODs? Like, okay, as I said, I know it's a mobile game, and they probably can't solve that issue. They kind of have to keep it. But for like they could have made LODs for some of these models that for like the PC client and that, they could solve that problem. In a lot of 3D programs, you can literally just smooth all that stuff out. Like, it's not difficult. It's not a lot of work. I don't know, maybe just a bit of laziness here and there. Oh well, moving on. So I want to talk about a few improvements from Genshin Impact that this game has managed to do. The first one probably doesn't really bother anybody, but it bothers me because I used to make a lot of content in Genshin Impact, and that is the photo mode. So the photo mode in this game is like 100 times more superior. And the reason for that is, one, you can zoom in really close to the character. The general control feels a little bit more precise, so you can kind of get the character right in frame or like angle it a lot better. The other thing is, what I used to do in Genshin Impact when I wanted a character to do an idle animation, I would have to stand there and wait and hope that they eventually do the animation that I want. In this game, there is an option where you can press a button and they do the animation. The only problem is you have a menu over your screen while you're doing it. It would be really nice, which I know they'll never do, but it would be really nice if they were on just a button press instead of them being in a menu. As for expressions, in Genshin Impact you had like 2 or 3 expressions per character. In this, each character has like, I think it's 6 or it might be 8. I can't really remember off the top of my head. But again, all that stuff is really good. There's also an option to turn the character around, which is quite an interesting feature, but it means you can just like say if the lighting, especially like I want to capture the character with good lighting on the face, and I start recording in one direction and I find this is not good enough, I can just hit the turn around and it'll turn around and I can turn them, whatever. So that, I think that's a cool little feature as well. But like the biggest feature is just the simple fact that you can go first person with a camera and film somebody else or film another character or film a scene without your character there, and you can also walk around in first person around the environment, which is all really cool. So photo mode is really good. Oh, and there's also like you can put filters on, all that kind of stuff wasn't there before for like once you've taken the photo. So yeah, the photo mode is just way better. Yeah, I hope they kind of add more to it. I guess they probably won't. If Genshin Impact's anything to go by, they ain't gonna change shit. So the other thing, and this is again something that probably affects like hardly like 1% of people, but I play on PC, right? And Genshin Impact, I use the controller to play. Whenever my control disconnects on Genshin Impact, the game refuses to let my control reconnect to my computer. And it isn't until I turn Genshin Impact off and then try and reconnect the controller that it will actually work, and then I have to reboot Genshin Impact. So, for example, if I'm in a cutscene and then I have to go somewhere, what will happen is when I come back, the control will be disconnected because there's like a time limit until the control disconnects, right? And then I can't progress the dialogue because my controller's not connected. I try and connect it, it won't connect. So I have to close the game, restart the game, go through all the dialogue again to get back to where I was. Like, that shit's stupid. And it's been an issue since launch on Genshin Impact, and they never fixed it. Now, in this game, that shit doesn't happen, which is brilliant. But not only that, the way the controller and the keyboard interact is completely different. So again, in Genshin Impact, you want to go to controller, right? So you go into the options, you select controller. Now all the button prompts and everything change, but you can't use the mouse and keyboard. But in Honkai Star Rail, if you move the mouse around, you've got mouse and keyboard controls. And then if you touch the controller, all of a sudden, all the prompts change and now you're in controller mode. So it is seamless. So I basically use both. When I'm moving around and I'm in combat, I like to use the controller because it feels better to me. But then when I'm in the menus, sometimes there's certain things that are kind of a bit of a pain in the ass to get to with the controller because you have to press certain buttons and stuff. So I just grab the mouse and I click on things. The fact that I can use both control schemes seamlessly is incredibly good. Right, so let's move on to story and narrative. So here I might touch on spoilers a little bit, but I'll try for the most part to avoid it. So if you've not got that far in the story, or you haven't even decided to play this game yet for whatever crazy reason, the game's free, just try it out. So the narrative in this game, in my honest opinion, far surpasses Genshin Impact, mostly because of the way it's told and the way the scenes play out and the characters act and all this kind of stuff. I know this isn't a Genshin Impact review, but I'll just talk about why Genshin Impact personally annoys me. The first thing is the exposition fairy that basically just relays all the information of the conversation back to you in like layman's terms all the time, treating you like you're a complete idiot. Then there's like over bloated dialogue segments where they outstay their welcome, and most of the time they achieve very little. And they just kind of go on and sometimes feel like they're repeating themselves. Again, with exposition fairy at the end to repeat it all back to you once again. For the most part, the story rarely feels like there's many stakes, and a lot of the problems often seem very easily resolved. The biggest one for me was in Inazuma, and when we got to the end, we had that kind of confrontation with Signora in the castle thing, I forgot what it's called. We leave, and then out of nowhere, all the resistance people show up in the middle of Inazuma somehow, and then Kazuha fixes everything, and then it felt very rushed, and it felt like all the stakes and everything were just gone instantly. Granted, the Sumeri story was much better, and also it was longer, so it had time to breathe. But most of the time, the stakes and it just isn't there. The other thing I want to say is characters rarely go on actual arcs and grow as characters. They kind of, dare I say it, they're kind of two-dimensional in a lot of circumstances. They're kind of like caricatures where they kind of start a certain way and then they have like these personality quirks that define their personality, and then that is just the character, and you don't really see much change and growth in them. Some people might argue that sometimes characters kind of like, oh, this character was shy, and then they make a friend, and then that's kind of an arc. Okay, but in terms of the main story and the narrative, you don't really follow somebody through an actual journey or struggle. The only one that kind of comes to mind that might like fit into that is Raiden Shogun, how she kind of changes towards the end, but it's all very not that deep. Now let's compare like this to Star Rail. People often compare March 7th to Paimon, but I honestly don't really feel like this is a very valid comparison. And a lot of the role of Paimon is kind of split across all the characters of the Express, like delivering exposition and kind of the comic relief and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes Mark 7th can do the kind of thing that Paimon does where she repeats stuff back to you, but it's kind of quite rare and it feels more organic and natural. March 7th also can be a bit of the butt of the joke sometimes, which is like what Paimon's like, where you can, there's certain dialogue choices that you can make that kind of poke fun at March 7th. But I feel like as a character, she's just better than Paimon. She's not as annoying. Yeah, she's nowhere near the same level as Paimon. So even if she might kind of fill that role to some extent, it's just done in a better way. Good old Daniel, he's also a pretty good source for exposition and explaining things to you, but it all makes sense within the narrative because they've been on the Express for a while and you're like the new kid on the block who's just kind of learning the ropes. From that kind of angle, that all just works. It's fine. Mentioning dialogue choices. So the thing I've noticed in Genshin Impact dialogue choices is now, instead of becoming actual choices, they've started to become half of a sentence followed by the second half of a sentence. So there's not even a choice there. You're just choosing between the first half of the sentence or the second half of the sentence, and it's like, what's the point of even having a dialogue choice? They're literally using the dialogue choices as a way to have the character speak. And it's like, why even have a choice there? Why not just have a dialogue box with the character say stuff? It's just the way they've always done it. And it's like the actual dialogue choices have become less and less significant, and they've always been an illusion of choice. Most of the time they only affect the next kind of bit of dialogue, and then we're just back to where we were before. And that's kind of the same with Star Rail, but they feel a lot better. A lot of the dialogue choices, I always pick the joke one because the joke one's funny, and I love to see March's reaction or other people's reaction because I never take the situation seriously. And at one point I can't remember if it's around when something to do with Cocolia, and the choice you have is, I've got no funny joke to make here. Because it was like such a serious moment. But stuff like that, it really actually adds some kind of personality to the main character, which is kind of great. It kind of takes them a bit away from the silent protagonist. They kind of are a silent protagonist for the most part, but the other thing they do is there's a lot of internal monologue where the character actually speaks, and you kind of get a feel for that the main character is actually a character and not just this kind of blank slate that you're supposed to impose yourself on, which is, I like that. I wish they had the characters speak. Like when you press a dialogue choice, they actually say it. So stakes in the story. I'm only going to speak for Belobog because the Lufu, whatever it's called, the Lufu area hasn't really finished or concluded yet. There's still a lot of story to go. I've got some criticisms for that area, that kind of part of the story in particular that I'll go into in a bit. But for Belobog, I think that story is very well done. Particularly the one thing is that there feels like there are somewhat some stakes. It does feel like it kind of resolves quite quickly toward the end, but I think it's fine. The thing I do like about it though is how Bronya actually goes on a bit of like an arc where she's like this kind of sheltered daughter of the Guardian, who then, because of various circumstances, ends up down in the underworld to learn how different life is down there, and her eyes kind of get opened up. And then as we kind of go through, she kind of learns a lot of stuff about her own past, and then this kind of all becomes like a driving force for her to kind of pursue the path that she chooses in the end. And that is actually a story arc for a character. And maybe somebody can correct me on this, but I can't think of an example in Genshin Impact where that kind of happens, which is kind of dumb, to be honest, because it's such a simple thing. Future me interjecting here just to say that I'm talking about the main narrative of Genshin Impact. I'm not talking about side stories or anything like that, because in some of the world stories and some of the side stories there is kind of some character growth and arcs and stuff, but I'm specifically talking about the main narrative. Don't get me wrong, the lore and everything at Genshin Impact is brilliant, but when it comes to storytelling, I just don't feel like it's there at all. So yes, Belobog story, I was incredibly happy with that. The cutscenes and everything, the way the characters interact, it's like kind of a step above Genshin Impact. Sometimes you do get those scenes where everybody's just kind of stood static and there's characters speaking that aren't even on the screen at the time, which I feel is a bit weird. But then for the Lufu area, the story's not finished. There's a lot of intrigue going on with Kafka and Blade and these characters. which I'm very interested in, but I feel like they ended it in a really stupid place. Where they should have ended it, in my opinion, is when you actually have that conversation with Kafka, and then end it there, because then you're at a point of intrigue. Oh, where are we going next with this? Instead, they made us do a load of crap with NPCs, and it kind of felt like a Genshin Impact's like storyline where, oh, the big bad here is just a generic NPC that feels very inconsequential, and like you do have choices that you can make in that part of the story, but they all ultimately result in this almost the same outcome. So it's kind of, again, the illusion of choices there, and I think it ends on a low note. It should have ended on somewhere where we're like ready. We're like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. But they kind of just killed that kind of intrigue by having all this extra crap at the end of it. Because I'd be fine if all that content at the end of the story was the start of the next kind of segment, and then we kind of build up to something big by the end. But oh well, it is what it is. So yeah, generally happy with the narrative. I think it's better than Genshin Impact so far. We'll see where it goes. We'll see if it becomes really like crappy, because I think for a lot of these things, because this is a new game and everything's fresh and new, I could kind of have a bit of a bias toward this game, whereas with Genshin, because I've played it for so long, I feel very jaded with the game. But generally, I'm really enjoying this game. So while we're talking about story, just another thing to interject here. The other thing I really like about this game is how you can interact with a lot of things, and there's flavor text. And the one thing that I spent a lot of time doing, especially in Belobog, was interacting with every single trash can that I found, because they all had these really bizarre little stories that happened. The other thing is there's a lot of like pop culture references here and there. There was like one where they referenced Heisenberg, which I think is a reference to Walter White from Breaking Bad. I haven't seen it myself, but somebody sent me a screenshot of two twins standing at the end of a hallway in the hotel in Belobog as well, which is a reference to The Shining, which I also very much appreciate. And just a lot of these little details, it seems like they've put a lot of like time and effort to kind of make the game fun and have these little kind of Easter eggs here and there. Particularly like the little scenario you have when you go into the closet, and there's all like this this whole weird storyline in there. I won't spoil it, but like if you've done it, you know what I'm talking about. So all those types of things, those little details, I think that's brilliant, and really good job on that stuff. There's a big thing that I'm going to talk about, and this is going to upset a lot of people. And this is specifically the English dub. So for the majority of my playthrough for the story, I opted to go with the English dub. If anybody knows me, they know that I'm very critical of the English dub of Genshin Impact. And I feel like a lot of the direction is not that great. And this game is no stranger to that. There's a lot of issues with the voice acting in this game, and it's not that the voice actors themselves, it's not a criticism of individual voice actors, it's more a criticism of general direction and casting choices for these characters. So certain characters, they feel very mismatched. Voices sometimes can feel very overacted, as if like the whole game is a Saturday morning kids cartoon, rather than like taking it seriously like it's a serious game. Just because it's like anime looking and cartoon looking or whatever doesn't mean you have to treat it like it's a kids cartoon. I'll give you one example which is absolutely horrendous, and why they ever thought this was a good idea is beyond me, because it's so bizarre. But at one point you're in like the mining area, and you have like this robot with you, and you use the robot to find various things. I can't even remember what it was because I tuned out of that part of the story so hard because of the voice. So the robot, it just keeps making this beep 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 noise, right?
Beep beep beep! Friends, do you need to find something? Findy can help. Just like
I think
that.
I'm getting desensitized to the English voice acting.
Request is being processed. Beep beep beep.
Oh my god.
Successful. Initiating search for lost item. Minecart pin. Beep beep beep.
Oh my god, stop
Item
doing the
found.
beep beep beep.
Please commence search according to
Okay,
the
I'm not getting
Home Use
desensitized
Object
to it.
Finder safety manual.
Take it back.
Beep beep beep.
Shut up!
Interastral piece of
Fuck!
Your beep beep beep. Findy will create a calendar reminder for when you want to visit an Interastral Peace Appliances store.
Shut up.
Beep beep
Fucking shut up.
As stated in the terms of service, my search result accuracy and reliability are not guaranteed. For more information, please call
What?
beep beep beep. Interastral Peace Supply.
Can it shut up?
Your most trustworthy companion. Beep beep beep. Potential target object detected.
Fucking shut up.
Search has concluded.
Let me see. Yeah, we can make do with this part. This little machine isn't half bad.
Beep beep beep.
Oh my god.
Beep beep beep.
No,
Based on your
please
search
kill me.
history, I recommend a humanoid tactical microwave.
Please kill me.
Press skip.
Please kill me.
Beep beep beep. As stated in the terms of service, my search result accuracy and reliability.
Fucking peace and quiet. Fucking hell. It was driving me crazy, and every time I just didn't press the button, like, it would start beeping at me. Beep, 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 over and over. And I literally went into the menu, into the options menu, and muted the voices so I could just do the quest without having to listen to the goddamn robot. And then when the robot disappeared, I turned the voices back on. That's pretty bad. And people in the chat were telling me that's not a problem in the Japanese version. Like, it's not annoying at all. There are a few voices that for me are like really stand out, and they're really good. Like Jing Yuan, he sounds incredible. I think Natasha's voice actor is really good. It really suits the character. And I think the main character's voice, because I've gone between the Japanese and the English voices, I actually prefer the English main character voice because she sounds quite mature, whereas on the Japanese version she sounds a bit kiddish and cutesy. So there's certain voice choices that I think are really, really good on the English, but for the most part they're not that great. Himiko, for example, her voice is very, very good, but for me it does not match Himiko at all. It sounds too youthful and young. It needs to be a bit more mature and kind of, yeah, so there's things like that. It's hard to explain. There's so many things. The one character that I also really like is Fujuan, because her voice is actually, it has a bit of like a accent to it that compared to a lot of the characters in that region, she sounds more authentic because of that accent that she has. And I wish they did that more. Let's try and give them like a regional accent that is consistent across the cast so that it kind of makes the area feel a bit more authentic. Otherwise, because the problem that you end up having is when they all have like similar accents that are like American, Californian, whatever, the voice acting becomes very homogenized and samey, and sometimes certain characters sound the same. I could just go on and on about the voice acting when it comes to English dub. I will say though, I don't have these same criticisms when it comes to the Japanese, mainly because I don't speak the language, so obviously it's harder for me to pick up on like the phonetics and like the accents, over expression and all these kind of things in the performances. But I will say that the Japanese voices generally, I have an easier time listening to them. They just sound nicer, especially when it comes to younger, like kid type of characters. Another one, for example, for me is if you compare the Japanese voice for Bronya to the English one. The English Bronya sounds like the voice actor would be better as like maybe like a nerdy kind of librarian type of character that is a bit more shy and coy, whereas the Japanese version of her, she sounds like she could fulfill the role of a leader. I believe it's the same voice actress from Honkai Impact as well, so that's the other thing that I should mention, is because I played Honkai Impact, Himiko and Bronya obviously are both in that game, and I'm used to those voices, so when I hear voices that do not sound like those characters, I kind of go, I don't like that. So that could be another reason why I'm quite critical of these things. The other thing I kind of want to give a shout out is there was one NPC in the mine area that when I listened to him, I was like, I love this character. This guy sounds brilliant. And he's got a real English accent, and he was quite expressive. And I was like, that voice is really great.
I remember now. These guys came out of nowhere and got into a fight with the mining team. At the time, I was exhausted. I'd hardly run a few feet when one of them caught me. If it weren't for wildfire, they'd have stolen the clothes off my back.
Why is the NPC like voice acting like cooler than the actual characters? I don't understand. And then later on, I walked further down, and I came across two characters. Like, I know these voices, and it was like Anime Man, and I forgot his name, but he's from. They do a podcast together.
Do you really want to go down there and be a live target for the robots?
That's fucking what's his name?
But if we evacuate, then haven't we lost out?
That's the Anime Man.
You idiots! We'll just steal off the miners.
So then I went to Google to find out like who the voices were, just to make sure I wasn't just like going, oh, that voice sounds similar. It's somebody that just sounds like them. And it happened to be all three of those voice actors were all the people from the Trash Taste podcast. And the voice that I really liked, that I thought was a really good voice actor, was actually Connor from that podcast. So I do want to talk about the music briefly. I think generally the music is very good. A lot of it is quite in the background and you don't notice it too much. Genshin Impact has a lot more kind of earworms going on, and a lot of the music you kind of is a bit more memorable, whereas a lot of the Honkai Star Rail music kind of blends in the background, and it kind of just, I wouldn't say atmospheric, but it kind of just is quite chill. But there are a few standout pieces for me. One in particular is called Freestyle, and it's right at the very start of the game where you're with Kafka and Silver Wolf, and it's basically the battle music that goes on in the background. It's like an EDM piece. I think it's like Electro House or something like that. Sounds like something Madian would make. It's kind of got this kind of big sweeping like build up, and then you've got these like glitch effects and stuff. And I really like that kind of music personally. So when I heard that track, I was like, holy shit, I hope more of the soundtrack is like this.
Looks like we're the ones getting ambushed.
But they're the ones getting besieged.
Unfortunately, that's like the only track that does that style. A lot of the other stuff is quite chilled out, and even some of the battle music isn't like that standout. And generally in JRPG games, the battle music and all that kind of stuff, it's stuff that is usually an earworm that catches you and you keep humming it afterwards. I don't feel like the music quite achieves that in this game. There are a few examples that actually do that though. One in particular for me, I think it's on the space station. It's called Space Walk, and it's kind of like a very chilled out lo-fi type of track, and it's got like this kind of little hook on it that's quite simplistic, and it kind of just plods away in the background, and it's quite a chilled out piece of music, and I find myself kind of humming along to that one. I'm not really going back and listening to the music at the moment to kind of pick out which ones I remember. Those two in particular are ones that come to mind that I can remember. Some people might be thinking, why aren't I mentioning the Cocolia boss fight music, which is the one that's got the singing, and it's kind of like rock music. I get why people really love that. I think it's an alright song. Just for me, it's kind of, I don't know, I don't want to call it generic, because I mean it kind of is, but it's kind of just there to be like, this is a cool moment, here you go. But for me, it's not kind of my style, so whatever. There's my hot take on that shit. Enjoy. Get upset about it. So now let's get to the biggie, the big elephant in the room, shall we? Which is kind of the crux of the entire game, which is the Gacha System. I'm probably somewhat biased in this regard because the Gacha System has treated me very well. So the characters that I really wanted were Bronya, Himiko, and that's about it. On the free banner, I got to the cap, and then it gives you like your free 5-star, and I got Bronya, and I was like, hell yes, I got one of the characters I wanted. And then I turned my attention to the event banner, and I did my first temple. Seele, 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 Seele. Oh. Bro. Pro. Who did we get? Fucking what? And I happened to win a 50-50 and get Seele. I was like, oh, okay, thanks game. But it didn't stop there, because a few days later, I decided to try and get her Lightcone. I'm not going to do anymore. Here we go. And I did 20 pulls and I got her Lightcone. So for me, I only spent 30 summons of like the event ones and I got basically everything I wanted. Whereas I know a lot of people, they've probably done 90, they've failed the 50, and they're still trying to, you know, get Seele even at this point. So I know I'm incredibly lucky to have got all the stuff that I needed. So for me, the gacha system's brilliant. I love it. It's great. But let's be serious. On a scale of awful to super awful, Genshin Impact and Honkai Impact are on the awful end of the spectrum. They're probably, out of all gacha games, they're on the end of some of the better kind of gacha systems that are a bit more forgiving and stuff. But it's still a gacha system and it's still bullshit. And the entire game is built around the gacha system, so a lot of the issues I have with, say, the combat, which is going to continue to, in the future, possibly become an issue, is because of the gacha system. The entire game has to be built around this system, which becomes a real problem for a lot of things. It works pretty much almost the same as Genshin Impact, where you've got a soft pity point and then you've got a hard pity point, and when you've got up to that point, you're guaranteed your 5-star. When you get to the soft pity point, the rate increases, so it's basically the same. It's like they've taken the system from Genshin Impact and just put it into this game, with one exception, which is the Lightcone banner is far superior than the weapon banner, because the Lightcone is essentially like the equivalent of your weapon banner. And what they've decided to do, which I'm very fucking thankful for, is make it like the character banner. So there's one Lightcone, there's not two, there's just one. And then if you fail the 50-50 and you don't get it, then the next time round you get it. It doesn't have this epitomized path bullshit where you have to fail twice and get two things that you don't want, because they've decided to put two weapon banners on two weapons on the banner instead of just one. So they've solved that issue, which I'm happy they decided to go with that. But that doesn't really subtract from the fact that it's a gacha system and it sucks. I'm not sure, so this is the other thing, so we don't know until the stats come in, but I'm not sure how easy it is to make crystals in this game compared to Genshin Impact. I would imagine they've tried to make it about the same rate. I know that the equivalent of welking in this game gives you the same amount of crystals, and I think it's the same amount of crystals to do a pull on this game. So I would not be surprised if they're operating around the same numbers. So it's trialed and tested with Genshin Impact. They've just ported it over and they've put it into this game. Improved the weapon banner so then people don't get upset, even though it all rips you off anyway. Even though it's an awful system, I'm happy with the current standard that of what we've got. This is actually above Genshin Impact. I can complain a lot, but there's no point, because whatever. It's just a gacha system. It's bullshit. So for me, I think I'm going to continue to play this game for the next few months, and we'll see where it goes. We'll see what characters are like. We'll see what the updates are like. I'm interested to see how they approach events, because it's going to be, I would say it's probably going to be closer to Honkai Impact, where we have all these like fun mini games, and because of the nature of the world, we'll end up having like almost like video games within the game. That's what I can imagine they'll end up doing, because in Honkai Impact you get things like there's a Fall Guys kind of mode. They'll add in things like twin stick shooter, platformers, kind of like retro gaming type of games. I hope they do that, and I hope that the events don't become like these kind of overly slice of life boring things. The other thing with Honkai Impact is that a lot of the events, you would go into like an alternate reality, and the characters will not be the same characters, but they would be the same characters, if that makes sense. They would look like the same characters, but it'll be like an alternate universe version of that character. So I reckon that's probably what they'll end up doing in this game, but that's just me like theorizing. I don't know what they're actually going to do. Again, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Because of the nature of the game and how the levels are, I'm hoping that updates are a bit more quick, so we're not waiting for a long time for like a big batch release of content. Instead, we might get it a bit more frequently. The story might be every other patch maybe, then we'll get like an event every other patch, and that will be like the way it goes, so we're constantly moving forward with it. But we'll see. Obviously, I can't predict the future. I'm not some fucking fortune teller telling us about aeons and, you know, the finality and all this crazy lore stuff that like most people don't even understand. You probably don't even know what I'm talking about. That's the end. Thanks for watching. I'll probably upload another video in 6 months. See you then. Ta-ta for now. Goodbye.
Till we make it. Oh, we will see. Come with me, take the journey. We will see. Come with me, take the journey.